Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the fifth and final day of session one with the Department of Education's negotiated rulemaking with the AIM Committee. My name is Kayla Mack. It's my pleasure to open and facilitate today. As we have done every day this week, we are going to quickly go through roll call. I will read aloud the abbreviated constituency name and invite both the primary and the alternate, should there be one, to read their names into the record. For students and student loan borrowers, we have our primary.
Magnus Noble.
And we have our alternate.
Ryan Hofer.
Thank you. For veterans and U.S. military service members, we have our primary.
Julie Howell.
Thank you, Julie. Our alternate, Stuart Helgeson, will join us again in session two. For organizations representing workforce development needs, we have our primary.
Siri Turchison.
Thank you, Siri. For legal assistance organizations, consumer advocates, we have our primary.
A.D. Mutson.
For public institutions of higher education, we have our primary.
Monty Sullivan.
And we have our alternate.
Luciano Castro.
For private nonprofit institutions, we have our primary.
David Eubanks.
Thank you. And our alternate.
Bill Hathaway.
For proprietary institutions of higher education, we have our primary.
Jeffrey Bodemer.
And we have our alternate.
David Cohen.
For state officials, including governors, we have our primary. Ray, would you read your name into the record?
Sorry. Ray Rodriguez.
And we have our alternate.
Mike Duffy.
Thank you. For institutional accrediting agencies, we have our primary.
Michael McComas.
And we have our alternate.
Heather Perfetti.
Thank you. For programmatic accrediting agencies, we have our primary.
Rebecca Pisaka.
And we have our alternate.
Brian Kessler.
For organizations representing taxpayers, we have our primary.
Michael Shires.
And we have our alternate.
Jim Blue.
For nascent accreditation organizations, we have our primary.
Mark Becker.
And we have our alternate.
Jade Foster.
From our National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity, we have our primary.
Jennifer Bloom.
From the department's Office of General Counsel.
Jake Lallo.
From the department's Office of Post-Secondary Education.
Beth Daggett.
And the department's Federal Negotiator.
Jeff Andrade.
Thank you all. Welcome. Jeff, I would love to turn it over to you to outline how we'd like to get started this morning.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. I will do first I'll do a quick report out from the after hours caucus that we had with a group of the non-federal negotiators. We discussed the separate and independent and the conflict of interest provisions and got a better understanding of the schools and accreditors' pain points and places where they had some flexibility. So we got a better understanding of where people stood on those. It was informative, and we appreciate everyone sharing their interests and being honest with us in terms of what could be done easily and what was a little bit more difficult. So appreciate all that. So for today, if you haven't received it already in your email boxes, you should be receiving our substitutes for 602, 16, and 17.
Check for it now. It'll be sent in real time at this moment.
Yep. We will also have it up on the screen. So the way to think of this conceptually is that rather than amending what we sent you in 16, we are giving you a completely new 16 as amended to the current regs on the red lines, and the same thing for 17. The big differences conceptually, and we thank particularly Jen and Mike for their work with you all in trying to give us the first draft, is that many of the requirements that we had in the first draft on 16 have been ported over to 17. This is our accepted version, so it's not necessarily exactly what Jennifer had sent over to us, but it goes off of that base, and we will walk through that step by step. After we do that, I will provide a walkthrough of the proposals that we have received so far and the status of those. Some of the sections that people had proposals for 16, we were able to incorporate into this version that we'll talk about this morning. And on some of the other sections, we are working on incorporating those. And so by the end of today, before you leave, we will have, which one of my former colleagues referred to as version 1.1, which is the changes that we have made this week. And that can be the basis for proposals for round 2. We're proposing to give you to April 27th, which is a week from Monday, to give us new proposals for round 2. And then we will look at those and we will turn those around on or about May 11th for version 2.0. Again, with all of the various sections. So are there any questions on the process for the rest of the day?
Magnus, please.
Yeah, Jeff, I just want to clarify. So do you mean like 11:59 p.m. on Sunday the 26th or until midnight on Monday? I'm a student, so I got to ask.
And Kayla asked us that specific question, so
I did.
good for her. When we say that, we mean close of business in government parlance.
Okay.
That day.
So that's 5 p.m. DC time, more or less, right? I'm sorry.
Yep, más o menos, yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions about the plan ahead? Okay.
Okay. So with all that said, we will start with the new 60216. So the first change is in paragraph A1. If we can scroll down just a little bit, Nicole, thank you. Right there. And so we change the term set forth, clear expectations to establish. And then in Romanet 1, clarify that the first element is applicable to both institutional and program level standards for student achievement. And then the struck text below. So any questions on that change? Okay. Looks like no cards up, so we'll continue to move through. So the current standards as they appear in 16 would stay, so we would not have the clarifying question. So the language that we previously had moves into the application of the standards in 17. The next change is down below. And this is one where, yeah, I think all we did was have one change on the paragraph level. And we actually may change that in the next one because I had suggested that I don't think we need to restructure this entire piece. So, okay, keep scrolling through. So all of this looks pretty much like the existing regs. And we'll go all the way to the end.
Can we take a question?
Monty, yeah.
Monty, please.
Quick point on the 5-year item there. Not permit the institution or program to hold pre-accreditation status for more than 5 years before final accreditation action is made. I would simply go back to the experience that I've shared with this group and just flag a note that 5 years is certainly an appropriate number here and better than what we live with during that time. But I would simply say to you that 5 years is still a long time in the clock of a student. And while I understand we're talking about agencies, we're talking about institutions here, I think it's important that we as a group just pause for a second and say 5 years may still be too long, but yet an advancement. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'll point out that's existing regulation right now. If you want on this for the second round for us to consider a different time frame. And you can submit a proposal. We'll take a look at it.
No other questions.
Okay, no other questions. So 16 is fairly clean, looks much like it currently exists. So we'll go over into 17. One more page. Okay, so the first place is in A1, where we clarify that the application of standards should not only include maintaining clearly specified educational objectives, but that those objectives include minimum expectations of student performance as appropriate. Again, we had that language previously in 16, so it gets ported over here where it's more appropriate in the application of the standards as opposed to the standards themselves.
David, please.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, I'm just seeing this for the first time, Jeff, but in the first version in the student achievement section 16 or 602.16, there's a should. And and I think that should was there because the statute wouldn't allow us to say must. What's the effect of moving it to 17?
So rather than it being, so 17 is dealing with the application of the standard rather than the standard itself. So this is referring to how the standard is applied, as opposed to the content of the standard.
From a technical basis, leaving it as a command, like a fixed command, not a strong encouragement, actually changes the standard, arguably, which was some of the concern that was raised around the room, but was also why we put the should in there. By putting it in the application section, we don't have as much restriction in that regard, so we don't need to soften it with the shoulds for legal durability purposes. So where appropriate here, we've removed the shoulds. I believe that there are still some in there where we do want to leave some more deference for the agency in terms of how they apply, but where it's not explicitly required, we knocked out a lot of those.
Do you have follow-up, David?
Yes. So I'm still a little unclear on the practical effect. Does it mean in practice, an institution like mine, instead of being encouraged to do a particular thing, now in fact is obligated to do it?
No, because the application was always to the agency's standard. So I suppose you could read that as an implicit requirement on the institution. But this is just talking about what the agency needs to consider when applying the standards.
Yeah.
So this actually doesn't, tell the agency explicitly what to do for any of these components. It dictates, things that they should look at and how to do some of the evaluation. But it doesn't actually tell them what the standards that they set on their own will be. And so it certainly doesn't tell the institution what that will be.
Okay. And you probably recall my earlier comment about having some additional flexibility in the student achievement standard that provides some innovation for four-year colleges in particular. And I'm all for this. I think this is absolutely the right move to do. But I think that having that the extra option in there is even more important now.
Yeah, and we'll get down to that. You'll see that we did maintain some of that flexibility in there. We took some of the suggestions around the table. So this isn't just strictly the draft that we started with in 16. Some of the ideas that have been put forth have been incorporated in, and a lot of that flexibility has been maintained.
Great. I appreciate all the work. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jake. Please, Jeff.
And David, some of your suggestions are incorporated later on here, and I think you'll see them with regard to course completion.
Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, please.
Yeah, I know this was probably a lot of work last night, so really appreciate your team for the effort. And I just wanted to echo that I read this. I mean, I'm just reading it for the first time, but and a little bleary-eyed, but I read it the same way you do. I was just wanted to flag that I think that this is a place where explaining what you just said in preamble will be super important, so that it's in the record somewhere what we mean by, so that it doesn't look like we're being prescriptive.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ray, I'm over to you.
Thank you. And I just want to convey a point that my colleague Chancellor Duffy has made. While 1099B subsection G does state that the federal government cannot, quote, specify, define, or prescribe a standard for student achievement, this section also says that the department, quote, must establish criteria for accreditors that shall include an appropriate measure or measures of student achievement. So and this is also repeated, a similar requirement to this in subsection 5 underneath it. So we believe that what this is doing is in line with that and is something that the department should be including into the revised standards.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, the statute does say that, but it also prohibits and we're sort of, I think we've kind of found a good solution to what I'm about to say, but the statute actually explicitly in a different section restricts the secretary from regulating at all on standards beyond what's in the statute. So it's a totally different section that does that. So I think that's why this is sort of an elegant solution, because we're now moving a lot of the department's and I think a lot of our policy priorities to a place where it's a bit safer to do that within and consistent with what the congressional intent was. And I think, to be honest with you, gets to the same place, because this is really, at the end of the day, all about what the accreditors do with institutions, but then also how the department will be regulating the agencies as they come up. And so whether it's in 16 or 17 for the purpose of recognition is actually not going to matter so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jake or Jeff, did you want to speak on that? That's all of our cards. We're ready to move along.
We can move to the next page. So this next page really brings over some of the concepts we had with regard to the review of faculty. This is still a bit of a work in progress in terms of we're going to try to consolidate this even further. We've done some work, but had some time constraints there. But it picks up what we previously had with regard and the language, some of the suggested language with regard to, for example, both dealing with the faculty and other subject matter instructors, which was a suggestion that came from the negotiators. And we're talking about evaluation on performance here. So anyway, I think this is cleaned up a little bit, and we'll continue to try to make it less wordy and more precise in terms of our terms. But this captures what we had earlier and brought over from 16.
Thank you, Jeff. Can we take a few comments and questions? Michael, I'll get started with you.
Thank you. For those institutions, many of which in vocational technical education don't use faculty appointment structures. I'm trying to follow if the expectation where it says such evaluation should also include whether the institution or program, and that's in 3 as the stem, and then you move down to Romanet 2, maintain faculty appointment structures. So if an agency doesn't have standards in that area because its institutions don't typically use appointment, they have hiring practices and things of that nature, and does that get checked off as an NA, or is there another term other than appointment structures?
How would you feel if we add as relevant to the institution structure?
Or as appropriate, or as applicable, or as some other subjective term?
Thank you, Michael. Jennifer?
Yeah, and again, I'm just looking at it now, so, reserve opportunity to make more comments on this one. I personally find this one to be, this level of detail to be a little bit problematic. Particularly, I mean, I'm really hoping that we can have a catch-all on academic freedom. So I am catching that you mentioned academic freedom here, and I would just love the catch-all provision to reference I mean, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but, it can have a bold reference to, academic freedom applying to all the different sections so that we're not seeing it multiple times over and over again. So that's just one thing. But I do also just worry about the applicability. So that as appropriate might want to be up top, not just in the one provision. Because there are going to be all sorts of different situations where it's just not applicable, like a comm colleges. So not unlike Michael's, comm college will have a different, or some do anyway, different academic structures. And so I think and I know that this does relate back to the standards and they get to set their own standards, but I do think that this will get scrutiny over time. And so I think an as applicable or something that tempers the laundry list.
Jeff, please.
I think this is one instance, and I generally agree with you that particularly like on civil rights and some of the other ones where we had multiple references to it, we can consolidate it. I think with regard to faculty, however, we do want a degree of specificity around the academic freedom issue. We want some requirements specific to the review of the faculty components. Because that is so intertwined with some of the issues that we have concerns about in that area. So again, I mean, me, I like to try to consolidate and use as few words as possible in these regulations. And so we're still trying to pare this down a little bit, but I think this is one that we're going to want to have something specific in the discussion around faculty. With regard to academic freedom.
Do you have a brief follow-up, Jennifer?
Just can you scroll up so the sub 3, I can see what's modifying the maintains academic freedom protections. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maintains applicable written form policies that so
this is referring to
okay, so it's the such evaluation should include whether the institution or program, and then has policies.
Yeah.
So you want every institution, I mean, I just want to sort of square this. So you want everybody, all eligible institutions to have written policies on academic freedom, like stated. I mean, I don't know if they use the words academic freedom. They probably use the words intellectual diversity but you want them to all have policies that state academic freedom?
I'm looking at David. That's our intent on this one. Yes.
Can I encourage that, because now every college in the country is going to have to go back to see if they have the words academic freedom in a policy. Could we have a conversation about like intellectual diversity or neutrality or like something that is it the definition of, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, again, we're not trying to impose something new because we think that should already exist.
Something, but
should already exist anyway. And again, as I said, way back when we started this, these take place within the context of existing case law in both the Constitution as well as the existing body of law elsewhere. So in some instances, for example, we've used the term religious schools. It's going to be a little bit different there in terms of those policies because of the free exercise clause.
Jake, did you want to speak on that?
Yeah, that's also why we didn't define the term academic freedom. Like Jeff said, there's case law that uses the word academic freedom, but because it's undefined, an equivalent policy that, does the same thing. And as if you want to call it intellectual diversity, viewpoint neutrality, granted, those could be interpreted to be slightly different. As long as it actually does the same thing and it provides those guarantees, it would be fine.
Okay.
I've got a number of cards back. I will circle back. David, you are next.
Yes, thank you. In reference to Romanet 4 maintains sufficient flexibility in institutional staffing, I think I can visualize the concept, but I wonder if you could give kind of an example of what this is trying to get at.
Yeah, so that the evaluation of standards isn't looking at strictly numerical numbers, that there's a acknowledgement that staffing levels vary depending on a number of external factors, such as the size, whether or not the programs are going to continue, the financial conditions of the institution, those type of things. But which from our understanding are things that are already, in general, our best practice is to be looked at anyway.
So if I understand correctly, we want to anticipate future variability and be prepared for that. And since it's much easier to hire people than to fire them, we can accommodate rapid growth more easily than we can rapidly shrinking. It would seem to imply that the bias here is toward having more contingent faculty in the staff so that we could more easily downsize. Am I reading too much into that?
I got this one. I think that's one side of it, and you could certainly read it that way, but I don't think it is that restrictive. I think, we've heard a lot of expression from people at the table about the concern of institutions closing. Certainly we've seen institutions that are kind of hamstrung by the way that they've, set up staffing and capital investment policies. This is to really just encourage institutions to be thoughtful about that. We've certainly talked separately about faculty appointment. This is, when forming those policies, that you basically don't create a situation that you can't get yourself out of financially. It just, again, it's to encourage institutions to be nimble. It doesn't do anything in terms of restricting their ability to tenure faculty or appoint people, just to be mindful of, what those contracts look like. And also, this would go way beyond that too, right? This could go into what does your staffing look like to support everything else for non-academic faculty as well, or staff in that case, I guess. So that might feature in, the contracts you enter into with collective bargaining agreements for unions, as well as with servicing companies or otherwise. So this is really just more about being mindful about the long-term implications of the contracts that the institution is entering into and how that relates to the institution's performance.
Great. Those details are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jake. Monty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kayla. And like my colleagues, I want to thank the staff for incredible work overnight to get us to this place. If we can, I'd like to go up to item C. If you can scroll up a bit or down a bit, maybe. In particular, I'm want to just put out an idea that this notion of faculty performance to be defined by accreditors, no question. But I think this group would all agree that the number one item we want faculty to focus on is student outcomes, student learning. And so would it be appropriate to just add specifically student learning as it relates to defining the performance of faculty? I think all of our institutions around the table would acknowledge that student outcomes is the point of faculty. But I think it's worthwhile to place it in these regulations just to make sure that this isn't dropped along the way. This isn't about faculty showing up and lecturing to a set of empty chairs. It's about faculty moving students forward. And so I just would suggest a specific reference to student outcomes in this section.
Okay. Thank you, Monty. I'll make sure Beth's got it down. Okay.
Thank you, Monty. Ray, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kayla. I also want to commend staff for the work they put in to produce this product for us to have so quickly to go over today. On the topic of academic freedom, I've got a couple of points. The first is, if we have institutions that don't have their academic freedom policies defined, I don't think it's a bad thing for them to go and create an academic freedom policy. I think that's a good thing. And the reason I think that's a good thing is academic freedom has become this nebulous concept that you will see anytime there's a controversy in higher ed. Every story has a faculty member claiming, no matter what the controversy is, that is a violation of their academic freedom. And the reason they can do that is there are no standards that have defined what academic freedom is. And if institutions are going to do this, then when this occurs, you look at the charge, you lay it on the standard, and you can determine pretty quickly if there's a violation or not. That's a good thing for higher ed. I think academic freedom is important. I think if you go back, and I mentioned yesterday, Supreme Court decisions around the concept of academic freedom, where they recognize it's a special concern of the First Amendment. I'm happy we are taking the action that we're proposing here. But I do think there's a difference between academic freedom and whether you call it intellectual diversity or viewpoint diversity. The two are not the same, and you can have one without the other. And I think both are equally important, and we should have both in the accrediting standards that we're proposing or putting out through this rulemaking process. And so I hope we don't lose sight of that as we move forward.
Thank you, Ray. I'm going to move on to AD. You have the floor.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment with regards to academic freedom or viewpoint freedom. And I think it's extremely important that it is there because it, regardless of what others may have argued yesterday, I think it's pretty clear that in some universities there's only almost all one view, and that is not good for students who, having had discussions yesterday with students who were not only uncomfortable speaking out, but they wrote papers that did not meet their own personal views. They changed because they knew that if they wrote a paper that goes against the prevailing view of all faculty, they would be penalized. So I think it's very important. With one comment that Jennifer made about with regards to as far as anywhere we're going to have academic or viewpoint freedom, to the word neutrality, I think we have to be very careful, especially, and I don't think Jennifer's going to argue about that when it comes to either agencies or institutions that have religious missions, that and again, we still have to come up with exact language that works for everybody, that neutrality is a very sensitive term with regards to those types of institutions. I don't think there's a disagreement on the department. I just wanted to put it for the record that anytime you say neutrality, when it comes to those institutions, we have to fix it or exempt it.
Yes, AD. Yeah, it's very much on our radar screen, AD. We appreciate the reminder. And we'll continue to strive to meet those requirements as well.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, AD. Mike Shires, you have the floor.
Thank you. As a professor, I want to I thank the department for the work on this and for Jennifer and Michael leading the conversation that I think has led to this new language. Academic freedom is one of those key issues that we struggle with in the academy. I spent the 3 of the last 4 years building an institution where our entire mission was built around the question of what is academic freedom. And it's an amazing diversity of ideas that fuel that, all the way from the freedom to do whatever I want to the actual application of crazy ideas in pursuit of research. And I think that as we think about the conversation in higher education, this is another, and I echo Ray's comment about this is not the same as the intellectual diversity conversation. These are both essential components of what it means to do for the enterprise of higher education. And I think there's a second piece of this for institutions that don't currently have definitions of academic freedom. The people most vulnerable in that environment are actually the visiting professors and the folks who are not in a tenured environment, and even faculty who have tenure in some institutions, to the extent those processes don't reflect that openness to conversation. And so I think this is a phenomenal kind of craftsmanship of language that will allow us to leave the conversation open to accreditors and to their members in the institutions, but will force that conversation, as I talked about before, around intellectual diversity to happen on our campuses.
Jake, did you want to speak on that?
Yeah, I think actually that's a really good point and one that we haven't really hit on. This really protects, in a large way, faculty. And this is really where it does come down to content neutrality. You raised an incredible point about the visiting professors. I hadn't even really thought about that. And, we talked a lot about faculty appointments has been discussed a lot. Obviously, that's a very political process within universities. Protecting or crafting strong academic freedom requirements and freedom of inquiry, standards at the university level really does encourage the development of a strong faculty long term, because it ensures that, visiting faculty, adjunct faculty, and, younger academics coming in are really protected and encouraged to explore within their own area as far as they want and not be afraid of being squanched by the, overwhelming majority of, institutional groupthink, stickiness. I don't know what you want to call it, but the thing that like entrenched institutions can get into. So this really does allow for institutions to become the best version of themselves and to allow academics the freedom to do what they do best.
And I think most importantly, it allows the institutions the freedom to do that.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jake. If I move on to our next card, Magnus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kayla. I want to echo and applaud Monty's point earlier about including student outcomes. I think the vast majority of institutions, the aim of faculty is student outcomes. I do recognize that at universities, especially research-oriented universities, faculty members often have other duties in addition to that. But I think sometimes faculty can get lost in the sauce when it comes to research and not always think about student outcomes or how the best way pedagogy in general, how can they best apply pedagogy to their students when they're research-oriented minds. However, I do want to bring us back to the text because I have a suggestion. It's a little bit further down than where we are now. It's on page 13. It is subsection D under Romanet 3.
Okay, can you hold that until we get there?
Sure.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, I didn't want to jump around, but that's where I'm at with
Okay.
it. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, appreciate. Yeah, we'll continue to walk through. But appreciate that one. Okay, thanks, you.
I'll circle back, Magnus. Thank you. Michael, you have the floor. Before you start, Michael, I believe there's a motion to exchange at the table. Okay. Thank you. So for public institutions, we are bringing Luciano to the table. Michael, please. Apologies. You have the floor.
Just to stay on that point about performance criteria, on Romanet 1B, include defined performance criteria. I think what Monty was alluding to there was this around faculty performance evaluation. So something along the lines of include defined performance criteria that take into consideration student achievement. Would be maybe an add there. And then I wonder if under Romanet 2, if the department would consider stating this more in the positive. And that is, I'll just read it. And if you want me to give you the language, I can do that for your consideration. But maintains faculty appointment structures that support instructional quality, program relevance, and institutional effectiveness, and which permit the institution to address persistent deficiencies in such structures.
Yeah, well, I think we're fine taking that. Of course, it adds more words, Mike, but in deference to you, we'll put that in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, I do want to be on a bit of record because I realized the public never saw what Michael and I put forward. So I do want to be a bit on record as to where there are changes. And this is actually the idea of moving from 16 to 17 was a significant component of what we put forward. But the other component was to streamline and be more efficient in the regs. And I do feel like this is going backwards a bit. So I do want to be on record just for the benefit of the public to know that this actually is not what we proposed. It's a good chunk structurally. And so I appreciate the department taking the structure, but they did not take a fair bit of the changes that we had suggested. So I did want to be on record on that. And then I did want to express a concern, which is one of the reasons we had streamlined this. I don't think and I want to be really clear on the conversation of academic freedom. I don't think there's anybody at the table who doesn't, I mean, I hope not anyway, who supports, you know, I'm a trustee at a college. I mean, I'm fully immersed on governance and on academic freedom and fully support it. It's who's the arbiter of it and who's the one who's policing it. And I want to express concerns with putting that onto squarely the accreditor. Now, on the one hand, I prefer the accreditor than the department. So I do want to say that too. And then I keep using the word balance. It's about getting the right balance on that. And so I am going to go back to say, I really just think it's better to have it in one place rather than have it in lots of places, because maintains academic freedom protections that are clearly articulated and applied consistently to faculty, regardless of appointment, classification, race, or other. So is every accrediting agency, like every single accrediting agency that accredits a major state university, doing that analysis?
Yeah, they would be. I mean, they're looking at whether or not the policies are in place. I don't think we expect them to necessarily be experts in what academic freedom looks like, but you know, it does need to meet an eye test, right? In the same sense that we want to see that the accreditor is, you know, checking to make sure that these standards are in place. Again, the accreditor gets quite a bit of deference in this regard. There's nothing that explicitly states that what these protections have to include, other than that it does protect academic freedom, civil rights, First Amendment rights, et cetera. But, you know, the accreditor, again, gets deference here. The institution gets deference in actually crafting that policy. And we are looking to make sure that the accreditor is making sure that something is in place. There's multiple layers of checking here, but like it's not prescriptive as to what it is. And again, we don't expect the accreditor to be delving into all the details, but certainly some accreditors may take a more active hand in this and be, you know, more pronounced about what academic freedom means to them than others, I think.
But it is prescriptive. Do I have time?
No.
Okay.
Brief follow-up, very brief, and then I'll circle back.
Hope I can remember my thought.
I'll circle back. Thank you. Mark, thank you for your patience. You have the floor.
Jennifer, I'll stay on this thread. So if I'm hearing Jake right, it's basically that the institution has a policy on academic freedom. It does go on to say that maintain structures. And so that when you think structures beyond policies, I think the question Jennifer is asking is, how is the accreditor responsible for policing adherence with the policy? And I think this issue comes up in a number of places in the conversations we've had this week, which is there's not an active policing in that you're going to go in and have a structure for checking that they comply with academic freedom. However, if the institution has a record of perhaps losing in courts of law on adherence to their policy, you now have information for perhaps taking adverse action or issuing some sort of warning, et cetera. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think you're right on that, Mark. I mean, we are committed to having specific references here to in academic freedom as opposed to a catch-all specific to faculty. Again, as I said before, because it's there, and I think it's part and parcel that there are sort of tentacles that come off of that a little bit in terms of if there's a body of evidence with relation to compliance with your own policies on academic freedom, that ought to be taken into consideration as part of the accreditation process. Again, so we're not trying to have a new policing structure in terms of having accreditors be the arbiters of that, but since it is a factor of what we expect, you know, that an agency has with regard to standards, or an institution, I should say, has with regard to standards and has an academic freedom policy, we would expect, as in any other policy, that you look at what the institution's track record is, complying with its own policies.
And in terms of that compliance, you said, you know, there could be public things that you see. Are they losing lawsuits about it? But it could also be, is the accrediting agency receiving complaints from students, faculty, otherwise about this? And, you know, are they being investigated? Are you checking to see if they're following their own policies in those regards?
Perfect. Thank you. That's helpful. Then very quickly, back on the student outcomes and the faculty performance and non-performance. When Monty raised it, I understood that it was in item 3, Romanet 1C. However, Michael McComas made, I think, a friendly suggestion that it belongs in 3, Romanet 1, item B. And I concur with Michael, and I think it would be a huge mistake to put it in item C, non-performance, because there's lots of characteristics to non-performance, and you shouldn't be limiting that to student outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. AD, I am back over to you. Nope, no worries. Luciano, you have the floor.
Just a couple of comments. I support what I agree with Monty with respect to the student outcomes, but I would add also that it's important to take into consideration research. And although research, it doesn't seem to be connected directly to the students, but it is, because once a faculty is able to do research, is able to teach the students how to think, how to face problems that is currently facing other researchers, and welcoming the students to the frontier of knowledge. So when we look at student outcomes, the research part is also interesting and important to emphasize. The other thing that I want to highlight is what Raymond brought, the difference between academic freedom and viewpoint diversity. And I would even add that sometimes academic freedom can be used against viewpoint diversity. And let me bring things that I know by firsthand experience. Sometimes if one viewpoint becomes dominating in one department, they can use their domination to block diverse other viewpoints and the hiring of faculty of different viewpoints. And if you try to do something about this, they'll say, look, you cannot do anything about that because it belongs to academic freedom. So that is a slight, these two things, as Raymond said, are different. And it's important to highlight viewpoint diversity. And I think that suggestion that the Department of Education is making is great, because it's the accreditation agencies are putting policies, requiring the institutions to put policies to check this. It's not that they are checking themselves, but having policies. But I want to academic freedom, viewpoint diversity. I think that's important. It's a very welcome change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm not sure I followed everything on the faculty evaluation connection to outcomes. I don't have that language in front of me, but let me just speak generally about that connection. Those of you who've been watching know I'm all about student achievement. This is the thing I've been beating a drum on. And I think it's dangerous to oversimplify and put too much emphasis on one thing at the expense to everything else. For example, the outcomes are going to depend not on just the teacher's teaching ability, but also the resources they have, what they were hired for, their teaching load, the conditions in the classroom, opportunities for professional development, the quality of the feedback they get, policies on all kinds of things that affect that. And I would encourage us not to try to solve a 10-pound problem with 5 pounds of regulation, and take a step back on that. I'd be happy if we want to think more deeply about how to integrate that in a meaningful way in student achievement, that might be a better approach. Our knowledge of student achievement is generally a fragile epistemology. It's subject to gaming. So, for example, if we wanted to put value-added metrics on faculty, which is where this might conceivably be going, it's almost inevitable that those metrics would be immediately gamed, and we would fool ourselves into thinking we're doing a great job when we're not. We're just adding a burden. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jake, please.
Yeah, briefly. First off, I think the idea of making an academic equivalent of wins above replacement is really funny. And that seems to be what you're suggesting with that. That being said, we've been having a side conversation about this. We are very cognizant of institutions come in a lot of different flavors. There are certainly very big, research institutions. There are liberal arts schools that are entirely focused on teaching undergraduates, and there are vocational programs that are very all about hands-on training, right? Those don't all comport the same way. So we agree with you. We don't want to do 10 pounds of regulation to solve a 5-pound problem, but and we are trying to figure out how, if at all, we can address this within the faculty section. I do think our student achievement section already cuts at a lot of the issues that are being raised here, but we'll look into whether or not we can do something within the faculty section as well.
Brief follow-up.
I look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jake. Magnus, are you still waiting for that later section, or do you have something? I'll circle back. Jennifer, you have the floor, please.
Thanks so much. So first of all, Jake, I agree with you. I actually really don't want to see the student achievement reference in the faculty section, because even within an institution, there are different forms of what that looks like. And again, I just want to bring everybody back. This is to the accreditor review process. So this is like, if the department wants to think about that in a different context, but in this context, I as a member of NASIKI, I'm thinking, and this takes me back to where I left off a few minutes ago. Jeff said that it wasn't prescriptive, that the academic freedom protections are, but I'm playing this out, and I'm playing this out, by the way, across administrations, because we all talked about it means different things to different people. I think you or Mike said that, and it's going to mean something to different administrations as well. And I have an image of sitting at NASIKI in a few years or whenever with any administration, and the agencies come up, and this question's going to come up, and we're not going to know what the heck to do with whether it was consistently applied. I'm not going to be able to ascertain whether the accreditor looked to see whether the institute, it's not achievable. And so I think it's hard to, I don't know how to analyze at every, and keep in mind, like accreditors, they review hundreds of institutions. So I don't know, but this is the consistently applies is to the review of the institution. So each institution has to consistently apply. So I'm just a little bit concerned about this. And so my recommendation is to say, if we have to have them, I mean, my recommendation to be not to have this provision here, but if we're going to do this, I could live with maintains academic freedom protections that are clearly articulated and applied to faculty, period. Not consistently, not regardless of, because otherwise, I just don't know how the accrediting agencies look at it. And I foresee I hate to use the word political, but I see a political ping pong back and forth before NASIKI and for the poor, frankly, accreditors. So I would ask that. And then my final comment is on 4, which I'm not sure we're at, so I'll hold if we're not on.
Would you like to hold before we get then and respond to the first point, please?
I think actually removing consistently creates a lot of problems. First off, it allows institutions to have academic freedom protections and use them on one way and not the other. But I think actually in terms of, the NASIKI issue, if, looking at accreditors applied consistently, what the accreditor has to do here, I mean, are you responding to complaints in the same manner across the board? It's not, does academic freedom mean one thing now and one thing another time? Are you receiving complaints and responding to them the same way? Are they being treated differently at the institutional level? I mean, consistency at least suggests trends, right? And it's looking at the trends and the application over time. It's not looking for spikes in either direction. So it's I understand your concern about, the department, changing positions as like administrations change, but that's not really what this is about. This is about consistent application by the institution. And again, it should just be the accreditor looking to see if trends are there's an anomaly and a trend here.
Brief follow-up, and then I'll move on and circle back.
Okay, so the expression consistently applied when we're talking about the accreditor's recognition is consistently applied across the institutions. So they take their criteria and they review. So if they have hundreds of institutions, we, the government and NASICA are looking at whether they consistently applied their standards and their criteria across the hundreds of institutions. What we don't ask them to do is go into this level detail usually to see whether an institution consistently applied its policy on academic freedom to each faculty member. That just doesn't happen. So I think that there's a way to talk about consistent application of how they look at institutions. But when you get this granular, I think it's going to be really, really hard to regulate. I'm not sure where we're going to go with that.
Department, do you have any final thought before I move us along?
Yeah, so we've heard you. And as you said earlier, this is about balance. And we will look at that and we're continuing, as I said at the outset, to look at this section and to consolidate it. And again, you know where we stand in terms of how important we think academic freedom is within the faculty standards. So we can and we can just move on to the.
We have one additional card before we move on. Is that acceptable?
Is it on this section or is it another section or is it a general comment? Okay, no. If you want, we can go on this section.
I want to point out, I think consistently is important here because it shows, I mean, from the faculty perspective, I'm sitting here going, we have an academic freedom policy. If the administration changes, I'm assuming that policy is not going to change. So I think the presence of the policy on campus and that the institution having the habit of treating their faculty in a manner that's consistent with the mission of the institution is critical to this conversation. It actually creates some protection from that political influence that will evolve at the accreditor and the agent and the department level.
Thank you, Mike. We have one additional card and then we are moving on. Mark?
Just 30 seconds. We're talking past each other. This is about the accreditors. It's not about the institutions.
We are not using mics and we are not allowing the facilitator to call upon us. And we are going to take a point of order and get back into process. Mark, do you have any follow-up? Okay, Jeff, please move us along.
That's why we love you, Kayla. Okay, let's go down to the next page and see if there's any issues there. I will say that in Romanet 7, we picked up some of Monty's suggestions in that paragraph and incorporated them in. His comments were originally on 16. We kept the general concept and applied them in this situation.
Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, on 4, the Romanet 4, maintain sufficient flexibility in instructional staffing to respond to material changes in student demand. I don't want to get into a whole conversation about faculty structures, which I don't necessarily always agree with at institutions, but this is another one where I had our proposal, and I'm partly doing this for the record, our proposal, and I thought it was quite elegant that we had a really healthy, I thought, conversation. I thought actually we agreed in caucus yesterday that this concept could be added into further down when we talk about cost benefit analysis. And that so the reference to that there could be some form of reference to the when it came to staffing, not just faculty staffing, by the way, but staffing in general, faculty and other staffing, that could be done in concert with the cost benefit analysis by the institution. The reason I'm going back to it now is that this language is another one where I think it's going to be really hard for agencies to know what, I don't know what maintains sufficient flexibility in instructional staffing to respond to material changes in student demand. I mean, I don't think it's applicable. I mean, when I say applicable, I think it's hard to apply is what I mean by it. So I would love to, it's not that I don't support having a review of this. I feel really strongly about this. I just think it's more better done as part of the overarching concept that accreditors should look at whether institutions are performing cost benefit analyses when they're making very important decisions like on facilities, faculty, staffing. So I would rather see it like as a in the whole there. So I would just ask that that one be considered.
We do think there's some distinction and nuance there, but we'll take a look at that again for version 2.0. So, okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeff. Michael, you have the floor.
On 7, the indication is the agency must not categorically prohibit or unreasonably restrict the accreditation of A. And then it talks about short-term programs. And maybe it's implied in this, but short-term programs may not be in the scope of every accreditor. So I think that's something to consider there as well. You know, I understand that this may be an attempt to, encourage programs in Workforce Pell or at least shortened versions of programs, but I don't know that every agency necessarily may have the scope to be able to do that. I also think up in the STEM, you may have in 7, Romanet 7, ensures that program length is appropriate to the objectives of the program and credential awarded. And I think maybe in the edit that Jennifer and I had done, aligned maybe better than appropriate in that context. It's just something to consider.
Okay, we'll go back and take a look at that, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff. Before we move on, are we wanting to do an exchange? Okay, thank you, Luciano. So for public institutions of higher education, before we move on to another topic or section, they would like to welcome Primary Monty back to the table. With that, Jennifer, you have the floor.
So I've spent a lot of time looking at the executive order because I feel like the department was very clear when they started, even when they sent out the first notice that they were doing this rulemaking, that a primary purpose was to implement the executive order. And as it relates to accreditation, there's no reference to the First Amendment and doing anything with regard to the First Amendment in this, as it relates to accreditation. I also, by the way, would say, and I'll continue to say it, I happen to think that the language in the executive order on academic freedom and intellectual diversity is excellent. So I would just love, and I meant to say this earlier, I would just love to use the president's own words, which is, I can't believe I said that, but I did. I would love to use his own words because I actually think that they're quite elegant, and I can read them if you want on the academic freedom part. But it says accreditation requires that institutions support and appropriately prioritize intellectual diversity among faculty in order to advance academic freedom, intellectual inquiry, and student learning. I think that's actually really well written. So whoever wrote that, I think it's really well done. So I would actually fully support that instead of the academic freedom language. It's actually bolder in my view, and it's in the executive order. But there is nothing on the First Amendment in the executive order. And the reason I have some pause on the reference to the First Amendment, both in the context of the public institutions, and I'm just shortcutting that. I also have objections to the language on the private institutions. I'm just shortcutting, is that the accreditors are looking at, they're not the police on things that happen outside the classroom. They're not the policemen on that. They just aren't. And so, and I'm talking about behaviorally, speech-wise, and I'm worried that this is too broad. I'm worried that that captures activities relating to the First Amendment that are happening outside the classroom, which is really not, accreditors care about safety in terms of facilities and things like that, but they're not the policeman or the arbiter of First Amendment on campus. And so that's what has me concerned. I've raised it before, and I'm just raising it again because it was not, just for the record, it was not in the edits that we had made.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any response before I move on?
Well, I do appreciate Jennifer's support for the executive order in this case.
That line.
Just fun, having fun with you on that one. No, I appreciate your thoughts on that. So, and we'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. Monty, you have the floor.
I want to thank the staff for picking up the time-related item here. If we can, let's go to the top of page 10, which I believe is item B. And I believe there's a slight typo here at the very end. And employment outcomes for students instead of would. Who complete such programs?
Good catch.
Who? I've got to give credit to Alex Knott.
Anything additional, Monty?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Siri, you have the floor.
Thanks so much to the department and others who worked on this. I just want to comment on academic freedom and inside and outside. There was a case yesterday of a professor who was denied emeritus status for academic freedom. And so there are activities technically outside the classroom that are still incredibly important.
Actually, the case law on academic freedom, a couple of the seminal cases involve professors who were penalized specifically for their membership, I believe, in the Communist Party in the 50s. And that was definitively something outside the classroom. It was never alleged that they did anything within the classroom, but that was considered by the Supreme Court to be an aspect of academic freedom, that you don't penalize teachers for their actions outside the classroom if it's a protected First Amendment right.
Thank you, Jake. Any follow-up, Siri, before I move on? Okay, Magnus, you have the floor.
Well, I have to say, I love a good HUAC reference. It's one of the bright spots in our history. I say that sarcastically for the interpreters. But I will say that I agree with Jennifer here. This conversation is about accreditors. I think in some of the language that the department is putting in here, it forces accreditors into a weird spot, and it seems that they're believing that accreditors have a lot more power over some things than they should, and accreditors don't need to worry about stuff outside of the classroom aside from facility safety and things like that. So, as Jennifer so aptly stated, I would support that particular line to be applied as opposed to reference to the First Amendment in the regulations.
Thank you, Magnus. Michael, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'll sign on to that as well. I mean, there's much in here that I'm just thinking and struggling a bit on how an onset evaluation team would make assessments about whether or not certain practices or measures or indicators of what persistent deficiency means, or what non-performance means, or gosh, you should have fired that instructor because they had bad survey results. Why didn't you do that? And so teams would, and even at the evaluation level and then at the decision level, there's just a lot of detail here that accreditors would be hard pressed. And then we get into, there are other sections in the regulations where there are expectations that, accreditors don't make mistakes. And if they do, they have to disclose those. And so there's just so much that's open here that's expecting accreditors to do. And I'm not suggesting that accreditors can't or shouldn't do more. I'm just suggesting that some of these are reaching very deep into what are standard institutional practices, and good institutions are going to already have these things in place often, and so there is a marketplace that exists here with regard to student choice, and there's lots of information out there that students use, anecdotal and other. So I just want to reiterate that when Jennifer and I put the first version together of this, it was paring this down quite a bit, and so I think we will continue to do that and probably come back with a version 2.0 that continues to try to compress some of these things.
Thank you, Michael. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the Siri and Jake's exchange. And I agree with them, but that would be covered by the phrase on academic freedom. My concern with the First Amendment language is you have the language on academic freedom and the intellect, and then you have this. And so it sort of implies like that this is something different, right? Because you already have the academic freedom language, and then there's the First Amendment piece, which is broader. The First Amendment is broader. And so that's why I'm concerned, because it's like, okay, well, you're having the academic freedom piece, and we all sort of discussed, I think we're maybe landing on including it, right? I mean, I don't think there's much disagreement about including it at least somewhere. But now you're also mentioning the First Amendment and activities that go much broader. And again, it's not that I disagree with what campuses should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. It's who's the police person over that. And I don't think it's the role of accreditation. So I'm just going to reiterate that I think that the First Amendment piece should be dropped. All that section should be dropped altogether. And then I would just echo, I've been thinking a lot as we hit Friday that, and I think we probably all are beginning to think about how we all view this package. And you can't look at any one provision. You have to look at it as the whole. And while there are lots of things I love in this, because I'm really concerned about our conversation yesterday about the yanking if there's an error, air quotes, it as a package, I'm becoming concerned about how it all fits together.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jeff, please.
Yeah, so I would agree with you. I think everybody has to look at it in terms of the whole package, and particularly with this, this issue on the First Amendment, it does. The faculty pieces do intertwine with other parts of the package as well. There's the faculty's role. I think some of the concerns that we've had earlier in the week that AD brought up, for example, with regard to campus climate, does have an impact, and is within the realm of accreditation. So, in terms of having an environment, a learning environment in which everyone feels like they can sort of go about their business and go to school for the purpose that they were, in which they enrolled for. So, so I do think that there are some climate issues that are connected, campus climate issues that are connected to this. And one of the things that we did see sort of in the couple of years leading into all of this were administrations that did not do enough with regard to the First Amendment protections.
Thank you, Jeff. We have a couple more cards and then we'll move forward with the text. Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you. I really want to get clarification on the department's goals in the First Amendment, because the First Amendment applies very specifically to the public institutions and differently to private institutions, as you well know and reflect in this document. But the question, when I think about First Amendment violations, I'm thinking that's the purview of the Department of Justice, not the Department of Education. So I would just appreciate clarification on why this is here and how you see it being implemented in a durable way over not the next 3 years, but over multiple administrations to come.
Yeah, and again, I think the placeholder here is, are you getting the complaints? With regard to this, it's not a new enforcement. The Department of Justice, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights will continue to go after those as they have in the past. And that's really the context when we've had interactions with accreditors that has occurred. I've sent joint letters to accreditors with Department of Health and Human Services on civil rights matters, with Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. So we'll continue to do that. We think that's part of our responsibility. But again, we're not trying to create a new role here for accreditors, but to be mindful of the fact that if there are complaints, if there are violations of existing policies, that is part of the role of accreditors there.
Thank you, Jeff. Any brief follow-up, Mark?
Yeah, just very quickly. In case of public, to be violation of the law. In case of private, to be violation of policies.
You're exactly correct. Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff. Ray, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kayla. And in listening to the discussion, I'm hearing concern over whether accreditors have the capacity to enforce what's being proposed here around First Amendment, potentially academic freedom, viewpoint diversity. And I'd just like to observe accreditors by their actions have already demonstrated they believe they have this capacity. The accreditors all put in DEI standards and then held institutions to account for that. So they've demonstrated that they have that reach. I think it is appropriate that that reach be used for what's critical for higher education, which is a marketplace of ideas, which requires viewpoint diversity and academic freedom. So I support the direction we're going in here.
Yeah, I think Ray made a very astute observation with regard to the scope there, and overlaid that perfectly onto this conversation. So thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, you have the floor.
So I was thinking, Jeff, about what you were saying about sort of the department's own actions, and I'm thinking about the triad, and I'm wondering, and this is not just me, somebody else just gave me this idea too, so I'm not going to take full credit. But I'm wondering if maybe the First Amendment piece could be adjusted, and I don't have the language just popping into my head right this second, that if the department were to determine that there were an issue, that the accreditor had to blah-de-blah, like in the enforcement section or somewhere, like, do you see what I'm saying? So that they're not arbitrating what the activity is, so the accreditor is no longer the arbiter, but the department is overseeing this already. And so could there be a tie to enforcement on the part of accreditation or something? I'm throwing it out there. I'm thinking about it in real time. So I know if I'm not being clear, it's just, I'm trying to get to a consensus place.
I don't know how many more ways I can say we're not trying to have accreditors be the arbiters. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take that into account as part of the process. And to enforce the requirement that institutions have policies in this area. It is not a new role for accreditors. I think Ray astutely pointed out they've delved in this issue before. In many different contexts with their institutions. So again, we're not trying to make accreditors the new Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Education. We're not trying to make them the new Department of Justice. But we do have to take into account what happens around institutions and at institutions in the context of these particular sets of issues.
Yeah, I think that this can be understood really simply. I mean, ultimately, the accreditor's role here is to look, is there a policy? And if there is a policy, does that policy pass the sniff test or the accrediting agency's own standards, which may be very rigorous if they so choose to do that? And then finally, are you finding out about, supposed violations of their standards because they're getting sued or you're getting complaints about it? And if no, there's probably not a problem. You're good to go. If yes, you should look into it and do something about it. We're not asking for you to arbitrate, on what the First Amendment means. You're going to have accreditors will have their own policies in this regard as to what First Amendment and academic freedom really mean for their institutions. And they're looking at the institutions that they accredit's policies, which are, supposed to be in line with their own, and making sure if this works properly. It's not that we're pushing you into the role of the courts or the department. It's you're upholding your own and policies and making sure the institutions that you accredit uphold theirs.
Jennifer, brief follow-up.
Well, I think I see Michael's card just went up, so maybe Michael, I can defer my time, except for to say I've also received a request from the public that because the language that Michael and I submitted was never made public, there's a request to have it made public. So
that's on you, not us. So if you want to submit that,
Okay,
or
submit
share
it.
that, we can. have that be part of the record.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeff. David, you have the floor.
Yeah, just a comment. My institutional accreditor did not have a DEI standard.
Thank you. Michael, you have the floor.
Yeah, I haven't really weighed in on the academic freedom and the First Amendment conversation here. I mean, as an accreditor, agencies, currently have those kinds of standards that already exist. I'll just read one that comes to mind: a commitment to academic, that the institution possesses and demonstrates the following attributes and activities: a commitment to academic freedom, intellectual freedom, freedom of expression, and respect for intellectual property rights, and several others, climate that fosters respect among students and faculty and staff. So that's what the comments that I've been making around the table are more about when the regulations seem to push accreditors deeper into an institution's processes to maybe adjudge whether or not they should have, taken some kind of employment action with a faculty member that had bad survey results. That's what I think my larger concern is that let's not ask accreditors to do more than what Jeff and Jacob just explained. Do institutions have policies? And I won't, are they better than a sniff test? Do they pass a test of reasonableness, of credibility? And then if the department is pushing accreditors into then judging whether that meets some kind of other criteria like law and regulation, that's where you're going to hear me talk about that's not the role, and where the role of the triad is very important. And as I said, the triad is the state and the federal components of that triad are also have multiple entities that contribute to that. It's not just the Department of Education and the triad; it's the entire federal government. And so, there are many points. So I'm going to continue to ask for the department to give us the room to rely upon triad partners to not make determinations, but it is appropriate for us to be able to look at and see whether or not those policies exist. It's just when you push us into areas about making determinations as to whether or not they are effective or compliant with other law or regulation, where or they delve too far into institutional autonomy, where my concern is going to be.
Thank you, Michael. We have worked our way through all of the comments and questions. 10:30 is upon us. Are we ready for a break, or do we want to keep pushing through?
I think we can break here and we'll continue our discussion.
Let's take 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back from break, everyone. As we move into a next topic, I do want to acknowledge Mike Duffy, alternate on behalf of state officials, to the table. And Rebecca, I see your card.
Would also like to move my alternate into this seat.
Perfect. So before we move on, we're also going to welcome alternate Brian Kessler on behalf of programmatic accrediting agencies to the table. And with that, Jeff, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
Okay, well, we're still in the new 60217, and we'll continue to proceed through that. So, you know, I like to try to provide these incentives to move us along. So I'd like to try to get this through lunch so that maybe after lunch we can do the status report on everyone's proposals before you all leave. And then we can even consider maybe breaking earlier. I know some folks, it's been a long week, and some folks have the potential for some earlier flights and things like that. So, you know, we can, depending on how fast we get through this, the earlier we can break. So, thank you. All right. So, all right, so where we left off, we didn't have any comment cards up? Okay. So I think at this point we can go to Magnus's point on page 13, I believe. If there's no other comments before then.
Yeah, I just want to be respectful to everybody else because there's about 3 pages in between where we were and 13.
We'll pause for a moment and invite any comments or questions over those 3 pages, and then we'll move on to Magnus. Brian, you have the floor.
I just want to put on record that from the constituency of the programmatics that we do support the academic freedom component.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, I still just want to, because I've only done it in caucus, or I think I've only done it, who knows, anymore. But in Romanet, I guess I'm on page 11, top of page 11, that that Romanet 4. I just still want to register concerns. It's better. So I did want to register some appreciation from the standardized assessments. I still just, and I keep going back to my own, I just don't understand. I don't understand how my alma mater from undergrad, and then 4 years later, I take LSATs. I don't do great on the LSATs, how that has, and I know, and I said this during caucus, I'm just purposely saying it here, that I get that this is optional, but I just don't think, even when it's optional, I do feel like it's the department setting forth a concept on policy. And so even though I know it's optional, and I do want to make sure that everybody in the public knows that it's optional, as it relates to, you don't have to have a standard that does this, but I just don't understand the correlation between a standardized test that's taken multiple years potentially after you leave undergrad, how it would relate to the undergrad's quality, especially if you didn't do an undergrad in the field of that test.
Okay. Let me try one more time. And maybe this might have to just be one that we agree to disagree sort of moving forward, but we have tried to make some refinements in this a couple times. So currently it talks about scores on relevant standardized assessments taken for admission to a higher level degree. So that's one connection. And then in terms of the contemporaneous during and after the time of enrollment, and again, with regard to your issue about how long, that's one where we do kick it to, or there is some discretion with the agency, because while we would agree with you maybe 5 or 6 years, we don't know whether 2 or 3 or, years is the magic number, and we think the accreditor is in a better position to determine that than, and with their institutions as part of the standard making process, is in a better position to figure that out then all of us sitting around the table here can figure that out. So again, we have tried to make refinements. We have tried to connect it, but I mean, I think you know how we feel about data and the greater use of data is part of the accreditation process. And so these are data points that are out there, and we think that they are potentially relevant as a measure of outcomes of particular programs and institutions if they're available.
Thank you, Jennifer and Jeff. I'll circle back. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll just, on that one point, it's not as optional when reading all the way back up. And just because under on page 10, B1 Romanet, or I'm sorry, B is such agency review must include. And then so you have things where you're saying where applicable for state licensee certification examination. So I think we did talk about this yesterday in the caucus that Romanet 4 should also be an as applicable. I would think. And I'll stop there, and then I have another point.
Yeah, and you know, I'm not against that. Again, as I said, this is a bit of a work in progress. We did port a lot of things over. We're going to continue to refine it. Glad to take that comment as well as a suggestion going on. Again, we want it to be used when it makes sense for it to be used, and not when it doesn't make sense for it to be used.
Yeah, this is not a place where we'd be second guessing the question of the relevancy standard imposed by, an accrediting agency. I think we talked about some scenarios yesterday about this. It could be that a standardized test is very relevant for one person and not another. There's a temporal requirement that you guys brought up too. Those are all components that would come in to determine whether or not something is relevant, and that's something that is in the accrediting agency's bailiwick. And we think that this is covered here. As Jeff said, we can workshop this a little bit, but I think that this is kind of a 10-pound problem in a 5-pound sack, or vice versa, rather.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jeff. Michael, back to you.
Yes. Okay. Good. All right. Then my other point was about Romanet 2, about program retention, completion, or graduation rates, and you're using the word grades there, and not all institutions or programs use grades necessarily. There are many different kinds of measures. So I would suggest if you'll circle that one, and maybe it's something along the lines of assessment measures or student learning measures, which meaningfully reflect knowledge and skill attainment, or something along those lines. Maybe a better way of expressing that what we're trying to look at is you're assessing students and they're attaining the knowledge and skills and they're progressing.
Thank you, Michael. Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, this is another example where we have tried to qualify it as including as appropriate the extent to which grades meaningfully. So I mean, I'm willing to sort of, if you think that there's a term to make it even broader than grades that meaningfully reflect, we would include it in there. But we're not trying to put in grades where it's not appropriate.
Thank you, Jeff. Moving along, Mark, you have the floor.
Good. I'm going to take us to Romanet 5. Hopefully we're done with Romanet 4. So Romanet 5, first off, on the relative total cost, this is similar to, but not identical to, the FSA student aid handbook on cost of attendance. So are you expecting this to be a subset of the FSA calculation of cost of attendance? It's very close, but you are missing a piece or two, particularly miscellaneous personal expenses.
Yeah, so that term is including, and I in reviewing it, I have raised an issue about whether or not we need the parenthetical in there. We are looking at maybe cross-referencing the definition. But the main concept here is the educational and economic returns relative to the cost of attendance.
Right, it's the return on the investment.
Yeah.
And so then my question is, so that's good and assessed using reliable wage data, I get all that. The educational returns presumably would be the degree. So it looks like that if I interpret this in that way, because the educational return is the main return is the degree completion if you get it. Is this looking really at the cost of basically the cost of education? Is that the focus here? Looking at, is tuition too high? Is the cost of attendance too high?
No, I think this is really looking at the comparison of the two, because you could have an expensive program, which also has high outcomes. And what we don't want to see is what we currently see now, which is we have programs that are very high cost and very low return. And that has played out, significantly in this whole debate over loan limits and which programs should have access to which loan limits. It's also played out in the context of the, do no harm standard, and looking at earnings. So that is a very big concern for us is actually the relationship. So I don't think you can look at cost in and of itself. You have to look at it relative to the.
Yeah, no,
I think the educational part's also important there because that adds a little bit more flexibility for programs that don't necessarily themselves directly lead to employment in a position, but allow, a student to move into another, degree program. A good example of this would be post-bac degrees that are designed to help people, or programs for admission to medical school. Obviously, that doesn't help you make the money that you make as a doctor directly, right? But it gets you into medical school. And so the educational return relative to the cost is higher. So there's flexibility within that calculation.
Yeah, very, very much appreciate that. And just, I think for everyone at the table, this is actually huge. This is not a small addition. This is a huge addition. And I would say, I think, Jeff, to your example, I think everybody a year or so ago was made aware of a very expensive Master of Social Work program that led to a degree where you will never see a significant economic return for that very expensive master's program.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah,
David?
and thank you, Mark. And there are many other examples, and I think you're already seeing, even before the implementation date of the changes in the Working Families Tax Cut Act, changes in institutional behavior with regard to cost on a number of these programs.
Thank you, Jeff. David, please.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the new language. Thank you for that. For Part B, where it says such agency review must include, and then we've got one, and then the Romanettes. It reads to me like the agency's has to review all of these things rather than, say, selecting an appropriate menu. Maybe I'm misreading it, but do we need a hedge there, like outcomes such as or something like that?
So the structure of it, it's the review must include, and then the numbers, those reflect this. Those are cross references to the standards in 16.
Yeah.
And then everything below that, the Romanettes, are considerations within those standards.
So for an institution like mine, for some of these things apply more than others, can I select those or maybe modify them? I guess what I'm trying to find out is how much flexibility do we have to use things that are like this, but not exactly this?
That's a question for your accrediting agency, because this is their review of the institution rather than the institution itself, right? So it would come down to what the accreditor's specific criteria are for some of those things. So for example, where it's program retention, completion, or graduation rates, that's set up to be flexible. It's going to depend on what the institution determines is relevant for institutions in setting, or the institutions it accredits in setting those standards and evaluating institutions against them.
Okay. Maybe others who are more familiar with how the policy works can weigh in on this. I'm just thinking of, like, say, a religious institution that has outcomes that aren't quantifiable in these ways and yet mean a lot to them. How difficult is it going to be with the accreditor to make that happen? again, I'm all for this. I just want to make sure we have the right amount of flexibility so that we can custom tailor it. But I'll move on. I just wanted to respond to the point about grades. I know it is perhaps a little bit over specific to say grades. The reason I like it is because for decades, essentially grades have been more or less prohibited, strongly discouraged from being used this way. So this would be a change, and maybe that doesn't have to be explicit here, but it probably would help if it were, if we said grades or assessment, something like that, to make that, to signal that.
Thank you very much, David. Brian, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to point out for Romanet 4 and 5, I know that it's kind of a little bit of a backtracking, but I think, the explanation of the temporal component upon this, in Jennifer's explanation, or at least example of the LSATs, this is particularly in terms of the MCATs as well. For most schools and things, the MCATs become irrelevant after several years. So I think in terms of the temporal component, and it allows at least the institution to put guidelines around that. I also personally feel that the Romanet 5, in terms of things like a master's, like an MSBS or something else in terms of a master level, that is allowing a student to matriculate into another program. The outcomes necessarily in terms of the cost and things don't always in terms of that return on investment. I would also, in terms of something like medical school, individuals that are going into residency afterwards, they're really their compensation, so to speak, after coming out of medical school doesn't really comport to what they paid for their academic education. So thank you, allowing for the agencies to kind of put guidelines and rules around that.
Thank you, Brian. Mike Duffy, you have the floor.
I just want to offer something because I'm hearing the debate happen back and forth that seems to kind of miss what I think is the big picture here, which is this is about who's qualified to invite a student in the United States to take out a federal loan and receive federal taxpayer dollars, and that it can, in my words, be predatory in a sense, and we need to worry about that invitation being a promise of student success to these students, because the students are admitted under the premise that they are going to graduate. And if objectively the data is bad for an institution, then what role do accreditors as the gatekeepers play in that process? Because they enable that student loan to be taken out by that student who cannot repay it because they do not have gainful employment and they cannot succeed. And the institution statistically knows that it has a very low graduation rate, that 80% or 90% of its students will not complete within 6 years. So I had a conversation with A.D. Motson about this yesterday, and the data, I love the data. I understand the concern about helper professions, and I just want to broaden it to say we need more data, not less, and we need to consider holistically what's happening to the student. If a student goes for free to college, I'm much less worried about their employment outcomes. If that institution has a $6 billion endowment and they want to make it a full ride, great. But when it is, like it is for most Americans, they're first generation, they're taking out a federal loan, and they're doing this for upward mobility, and they're in a program with terrible outcomes or an institution that doesn't provide scholarships, boy, we really need to be careful. So the whole section is really about having that data to identify who are the students that end up in the circumstances, and it's really about the net price and what circumstance the student comes from. And we can look at things like loan repayment rates is what I want to offer.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're in full agreement with Chancellor Duffy on that. And I would add it's not just the money, it's also the time. There's opportunity cost as well for these students. You don't always get a chance to do a repeat of some of that time that you spend in college to go elsewhere. It's very, very costly and very expensive on a number of different planes. So, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think it's a very good point.
Thank you both. Jennifer, you have the floor.
So I just want to say that on the standardized assessments, I'm not going to do it now, but I think I have a way to say what I think you guys mean in a way that is more clear. So I'm going to provide language at some point on that. And then on 2, with regards to grades, I'm not going to reiterate how I feel about this language because I don't really love it. But if we're going to do this here, which is where I would put it, I definitely would not like to see something on student achievement in faculty. So I think this is the place that if we're going to do something on it, then this lands, you know. I did want to point out, I think Dave, you've said this a couple times. The department actually uses departments and institutions outside of accreditation do look at grades. It's satisfactory academic progress. So the progression of a student is actually pretty, darn regulated by the Department of Ed, at least as it relates to Title IV, but that's where we are in general. So I do want to say that the grades have for a long time, and non-grades, because it has been adapted to a deal with innovation, and that's complicated, but SAP has been adapted to deal with it. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands, there is a mechanism for student progression that I actually think makes a lot of sense in the sort of ecosystem of higher ed, because it is so specific on Title IV dollars and taxpayer funds. So I did want to say that. Sounds like Jeff has a.
No, and we recognize that, and we've had internal discussions. I think the important thing to keep in mind with regard to the satisfactory academic progress requirements is that those are a floor. Yeah. And so there are contexts where you could use grades in the continuous improvement context as well, where you're actually looking at values.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I did just want to put it out there. And then my final just quick comment is on 5. My only concern about 5 on the return is that you did just go through this pretty tremendous rulemaking that to me looks pretty similar. In fact, that's a really nice elevator speech version, in my view. Not entirely, because you did add educational, which is a different element. But I think some preamble, something that explains that, if the accrediting agency or the schools, they're already going to be very intensely looking at the high school, the comparability around return on investment in a different context. So just from a streamlining standpoint, I think some way of considering that in this context might be useful, or putting context at least in the preamble or something.
Yeah. So, in a lot of the things that we're doing, they're not duplicative, but to the extent that we sort of have similar concepts, we view them as complementary. So this is an area where we see this as sort of complementary to our efforts on the loan programs, and as well as on I think Workforce Pell has an element of that too, and then our extension even on the accountability, there's pieces there. So all of them are complementary, and I think are consistent, but they're not duplicative.
You want to speak on that, Jake?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think, our regulations, as Jeff said, are complementary, but our regulations are the floor, not the ceiling, right? Accreditors, we want accreditors to take an active role in basically being a mark of quality for institutions. We expect that some accreditors will set substantially higher standards than others, and I think that that's a good thing. And so it's entirely possible that an accreditor could establish, much more stringent standards for return on investment, as a kind of gold standard accreditation practice. And I think that, we want to reward that. We want to allow that flexibility, and we want to encourage that by putting it here as well as, promulgating complementary loan standards.
Did you have a final thought on that? Or if it's something new, I'll circle back.
It just occurred to me that I think the department on this one needs to think about, so accreditors actually look at, I'm talking about the institutionals right now, well, programmatics too. They look at student success and other issues beyond Title IV. And so here you are asking that to me, if there feels like a little bit of a, I don't know. I'm urging a little caution here on the breadth of it, because it's going beyond Title IV students, but it's just a thought, or just something to think about. I'm not, I mean, I'm
And just to dot the I on what Jake said in this and on this last comment, there is the continuous improvement piece of this as well, and trying to make, where you have it, areas of maybe deficiencies, showing progress against addressing those deficiencies. So to the extent that everybody's sort of rowing in the same direction with trying to give people a better value in the education that they're pursuing. Again, I think these are again complementary, and we're not breaking new ground, and we're not adding new responsibilities.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeffrey, thank you for your patience. You have the floor.
Sure. Going back to a point that Michael McComas made about in B, how it currently says must, and I understand the language is fluid, but as it reads down to 4 with scores of relevant standardized assessments, that becomes challenging for institutions to actually gather that information. We essentially would have to rely on the student, and it says after the time of enrollment or after they would essentially leave the school. That would be incredibly challenging for institutions to actually accomplish that, and we would really need the support of the department to open up the results of those standardized tests to us. Thank you.
Any comment there, department, before I move on?
I understand Jeff's point, so we appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Michael, you have the floor.
Well, I think there have been a lot of comments around the area of student achievement and student success. So I'm going to load up the bus and take us to wonky McWonktown for a minute. It starts at the top with 16, that success with respect to student achievement, and that we have to have standards in that area, and that can be in relation to the mission, and that can have different standards for different institutions, right? So there's a lot of kind of room there to David, the question that you were asking, and that's what prompted me to say. So there's room for that agency to have measures of success and standards for student achievement that are reflective of the institutions that it accredits, and they work on those things in conjunction. Then when you get to 17, then you bore down more and more into the detail on what the assessment of that looks like. And so what 17 is trying to do then is to say, well, as you're assessing those standards and the application of those standards, that assessment must include the following kinds of things. And so the things that you see listed in 17 are now going to become areas that, yes, an agency will be required to look at as part of the evaluative process. And there are still areas of opportunity for there to be some flexibility, the where applicables and where relevant and when available might be for assessment tests. But these will all be things, if it goes through close to what it is, these will all be things that will have to factor into the agency's, not its standards, but its assessment of the institution's practices and whether or not it's meeting successful student achievement, taking into account those things. But that list that's in 17, those things are not optional as I read this. The evaluation must include these kinds of things. So we have to look at whether or not, when we're making determinations about student success, all the things listed on page 10 down, those would all be part of the evaluation metric. And so the onset evaluation team is going to come in, and there are going to be a number of questions in a self-evaluation study or report that will have to at least address each one of these areas. And it can be done by the institution in the manner in which the institution believes that it can make that demonstration. So that is a very key component here. So it can look at the effect, the way that it uses grades. I wasn't advocating against grades. I was simply saying that grades is a limiting term. But I'm not. I'm otherwise agnostic on it. So we're back because the red light's on, and so I'll stop there. But I hope that just shows how we go from standard setting to evaluation to the opportunity for the institution, which has the onus to demonstrate compliance with the agency standards that are set in conjunction with the institutions.
Thank you, Michael. Jeff?
Thank you, Mike. And I'm going to say wonky McWonktown just because I want to see the interpreters say this in American Sign Language. So, okay, that's great. Mike, I appreciate you walking us through that process. That's something that we're constantly having to do as we write these sections and trying to make the translation between standards and application of standards and then evaluation of the application of standards. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff. AD, I'm pleased to give you the floor.
Thank you. It's a question for the department, just to clarify if I'm following along correctly, if there's been a change originally from may to must in the following way. In page 40, the original draft from the department was this list was may include but are not limited to. In Jennifer's draft of yesterday, it said may include as appropriate consideration of, and now this redraft has must with this list, and there's a few places where it says as appropriate. Is that, so the original draft was essentially may, last night's draft was may, and now we're must with some flexibility. Is that a change in direction and policy? I know it's confusing because of the 16 and 17 changes, but.
Yeah, don't read too much into that. Part of that was we didn't believe that the draft that we initially received adequately captured all of our elements. And so part of what we did here was basically port over the previous requirements and did not have a chance to sort of go back and pick up all of the nuances in that proposal. So I appreciate you flagging that. And that's something that we can take a look at and maybe rework that language.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, AD. David, you have the floor.
Yes, to follow up on Mike's point, I think I understand that now that these would all be required for the accreditor to look at. If that's the case, we need more flexibility because what will happen is an office like mine will spend all of its time on a scavenger hunt to find all this stuff when what we need to be doing is figuring out what the most important data means. And so if we can customize to the most important pieces of measures like this or ones that will appear next year or whatever, that gives us the flexibility and the to do the work, and the accreditor can still then use peer review and its standards to make sure that work is effective. And I know I've probably said this before, but I'll draw your attention to all of these Romanettes on that lists the outcomes are post-graduation, with the possible exception of the bit I advocated for about grades, which we have while they're in college. So of all of this data, the only mechanism that tracks a student while in real time where we could fix something for that particular student before they graduate or leave is grades. And there are other kinds of things that the accreditors I'm familiar with have developed over time that also are in real time, and being able to take the best ideas of those things and incorporate them and just focus on the stuff that is best for us would be most effective. So I guess I'm advocating for options subject to professional judgment. The other thing I'll say just about SAP, since Jennifer brought it up, we reviewed our policy a couple years ago because the policy doesn't guarantee satisfactory progress for a student. It's really a measure to see whether or not they are progressing. And the thing that's most missing in all of this, I think, is to be able to answer why questions. The data is not going to tell us why until we do an analysis that includes causes as well as the outputs. And so grades are great causality. What we found is that our policy threshold was too high. We were letting students through that should have been treated in other ways earlier. And in order to do that, you have to dive into lots of data details. So it's not just about the outcomes.
Thank you, David. Jake, did you want to speak on this?
Yeah, I'm going to respond to your thing backwards a little bit. I think you're right. I think the data is important. I think this is an iterative process. I want to go back to Mike's point. This is layer on layer on layer, right? What we're doing is telling the accreditor, these are what we expect in terms of standards, but we're not telling the accreditor the specifics of what those standards must include. This is essentially a broad strokes outline. The accreditor is the one who's going to flesh out the details with the institutions themselves and set these standards. So, there's more flexibility than I think you think in there. We've left flexibility for the accreditors. Presumably the accreditors are going to have some flexibility in the way that this is applied to the institution. Certainly if a creditor chose to, so long as they stayed within, the standards we expect, they could take a fully intractable and adamantine position in terms of setting standards. Or they could take one that, considers the different nuances of their institutions and is very data driven and, it has that flex built in. So I think that this is a process that we expect that institutions and their accreditors will work together on in terms of the accreditor establishing their standards. And those flexibilities will be built in appropriately. And, certainly with bigger accreditors that accredit a wide swath of institutions, they may have to have unique types of standards for different types of institutions. But also that means specialized accreditors who really know their field will be able to establish very fixed standards that they think are important and measure these outcomes.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, David. Brian, you have the floor.
So the risk of being redundant, I just want to echo what Jeff had said in terms of really the reliance on this data when you go after in terms of licensure and performance, post-graduation. There is a cost with that, but notwithstanding of the cost is the reliance on a good faith effort for somebody to give you that data. And asking graduates sometimes to get that data, the data is not always correct. So I think allowing the agencies to kind of put parameters around that, and I think, Jacob, to echo what you said, the flexibility, I think because the temporal component, how long that data, where that data is coming from. The other thing is something that we got maybe a little bit hung up on is this interlocking relationship, because some of that data is coming from institutions that have some sort of relationship with one another. And so I think we have to have some sort of protections or harbors or whatever we want to call it as those relationships are developed as you gather this data, because as we all know, garbage in is garbage out. So, no data there that it's not meaningful data, doesn't help anybody from an accreditation standpoint.
Thank you, Brian. Jennifer, you have the floor.
So I just want to say that, first of all, for Michael, I'll go on a field trip with you on Wonky Town any day. But I also want to express agreement with Michael and AD and the references to what Michael and I had originally put forward. And what I'd like to just say is that I think a lot of this might be that lack of clarity can be solved fairly easily with just some tweaks to the very start of the section. And so I'm already jotting down notes. And so I have a proposal that won't happen today, but will happen in between the two sessions by the deadline.
April 27th, close of business. Thank you. Mike, I'm going to go to you. And then dare I say, we may be ready for Magnus.
I just want to say, generally supportive of the direction. I think a lot of the amendments, the moving into the new section, all of this has been good, and the focus on objective data. And I think part of the struggle that I hear from the group is, well, I could look at this data point or this data point, and does that really show me the thing that I need to know? And I think from my perspective, there's two major risks here. One is a risk to students, and the other is a risk to taxpayers. And but for those two things, the accreditation process would largely be a peer-to-peer review organization that had nothing to do with taxpayer dollars. So that's why we care about that, is the risk and the harm there. And that really goes to inability to pay and have bad outcomes later. So while grades matter, and they can be indicative of ability to repay a loan later, as I was talking about, in many cases you have scholarships and things like that. So I've not proposed this yet, and I apologize for that, but I want all of us at the table to look at these provisions that we've added here and say, is this enough downstream of what we're looking for? Maybe we want to explicitly enumerate loan repayment rates and things like that. States have, and the federal government has, looked at cohort default rate, for example, easily manipulable. Don't support it. Don't think cohort default rate is the way to look at it. But I think whether a loan is repaid or not is something very objective, and it does go directly to the harm to the students. How to deal with Pell dollars, their taxpayer dollars that go beyond the repayment rates is more complex, but I do think that we could be thoughtful and add more downstream factors as opposed to just the inputs.
Thank you, Mike. Mark, you have the floor.
Just a friendly comment to piggyback on Mike. I think to the greater extent that we become more focused on outcomes and downstream measures, I'm concerned that I actually believe we could streamline and modernize this a lot by getting a lot of the upstream measures, which are biological markers, for example, in the health field. In the health field, you're looking at the outcome. That was the surgery a success, was the transplant success, whatever, instead of measuring blood levels and other things. And so things like course completions and a lot of this stuff, if we do end up in a place where the outcomes are really the substantive ones that really matter in the lives of these students and in the interest of the taxpayer, there should be places we should be able to actually cut back on the reporting of a lot of what I'll call markers of success as opposed to actual measures of success.
Thank you, Mark. Jake?
That's where the built-in flexibility here for accreditors to set these standards is important. As this goes on, we may, we've heard a lot of comments about data. This data is going to get produced as time goes on, right? So accreditors will see which markers lead to specific outcomes and can probably make adjustments based on that to prioritize the ones that are actually the most effective and focus the reporting from institutions on those markers.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Mark. Michael, you have the floor.
Mike, Mike Duffy, there already is, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, there already is a requirement for accreditors to have student loan default assessment as part of its standards, and that goes way back to in the statute from the 92 amendments, I believe. So we've had that for a very long time. It is a useful data point, and we do currently use that. I would just add one more example. So the agency that I represent and others like it, we have, probably the benefit of having very homogeneous kinds of outcomes. And insofar as, we're very focused on vocational education, career-oriented education. And so we do tie directly to employment rates. But I think to the point that Brian was making, that is no small lift because you are very much relying upon, and as currently engaged, whether or not you can get that information from either the student or the employee. It's a very high-touch kind of program. And so I was very impressed with the kind of data that the department is now going to be able to produce and to obtain through our work on ahead, and the annual earnings premium information. And I mentioned this the other day, and I'm hopeful that can really be a useful tool that the department will see favorably if accreditors also use that information in its review metrics, because again, much of the employment information, we're still very challenged to get wage data at a individual level. And so, getting the kinds of measures that you're now tying together from the IRS is going to be very useful. And I imagine that it will be something that we would be hopeful to include as part of this metric. It is, again, it's very high touch. We require third-party independent verification that the employment rates that are submitted to us have been that are accurate. And so, because it's such an important measure, but anything that we can do to help get that data and make it reliable is going to go a long way.
Jeff?
Yeah, I see Chancellor Duffy has his card up, but I was just noting that we're at 11:30, and I was going to suggest we move to Magnus, but I'll defer to Chancellor Duffy with any point that he has to get us there.
I just want to clarify that the reliance in the statute is on cohort default rate. And it says if you have 40% or higher in any one year, you may lose eligibility for direct loans, 30% or higher for 3 consecutive years. But there are consultants, there's an entire industry around calling students who are in default, having them reorganize their loan into a different method, restarting the clock, getting just below the 30% cohort default rate, and not having any sanctions at all under state or federal law. So it does not work. Cohort default rates do not work. Loan repayment is an absolute measure of our loans actually being repaid. And so I just didn't want to leave that unchallenged to say we do have accountability, because we functionally don't on cohort default rates.
Thank you, Mike.
And I will note, I mean, we did get a good 35 years out of the cohort default rate, but it is getting a little crusty as a measure, and I sort of agree with the direction there. So at this point, can we maybe move to Magnus?
Magnus, you have the floor.
All right, I was going gray over here waiting for that. So Jeff, I appreciate you looking out for me, and I want to mention, as a child of deaf parents, I certainly have an interest in how interpreters change the way that we talk about things, because we use a lot of technical language, and it is entertaining to watch. So appreciate you, interpreters. Shout out. Again, I'm looking at page 13. As a reminder, I'm looking at what I believe is now paragraph D. So this talks about conducting an on-site review of an institution or program. So I guess I have a question in 2 parts. And the first part would probably go to the accreditors at the table, which is, are there efforts made, or are there parts of your agreements that allow for exchange or interaction with students during these site visits to obtain some additional information as it relates to students? And part B to that is, if the case is no, or if it's some accreditors versus others, if there's any room in these regulations to add an expectation that accreditors will do to as they can, as to the best of their ability, to interact with students, because as a student leader, I do understand that it is difficult to organize students and get them to talk about this type of stuff and understand it. But I do think that it would be good to have an effort be made. So turn that to the group.
Thank you, Magnus. Keep moving with cards. Jennifer, you're next, and then Michael, I'll be over to you.
Sorry to go backwards, but I can't leave the page 12.
Sure you can.
No. Sorry. So sorry. Anybody, I think it's now public, the language that Michael and I had submitted, and we did not include this. What our suggestion was on the civil rights, because there are other places also in the regs that mention civil rights laws and other laws. And we had proposed that they go into, we had proposed that there be a combination of 60224, but I understand Beth and I had a sidebar. 60224 only applies to institutional accreditors, and so that's not a good option. But 60228, in my view, is a good option. It could be 60223, which is also operational procedures. I don't think this lives here. And I also think it's repetitive of the conversation we already had. So now we have it twice on faculty and academic freedom. So I hope the table can agree that we don't need it in 2 places in this section as it relates to faculty in particular, because we already have it up above in some form or fashion. And then I'm going to just say, for the record, that this also mentions First Amendment rights, and my view is that it's not consistent with the interests of the executive order to go broader than the academic freedom and intellectual diversity, et cetera, discussion that we had earlier. So I would urge the department to consider deleting 3 altogether and moving parts of it into a concept more similar to what Michael and I had proposed. And the caucus, I should say also, it's not just Michael. I mean, our conversation reflected the views of a pretty good number of people around the table in our caucus. So I actually don't want to make this the Jennifer Michael proposal, even though I know it's going to be published that way. It was based on conversations in a caucus that is about half the table.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jeff?
Yeah, and we tried to make that point when we were describing it earlier that even though you were the principal authors, it did reflect the input. And just a quick note on the reference to the executive order. When we proposed the notice of intent to negotiate, we referenced the executive order, but we also reference a bunch of other administration priorities in there. So I wouldn't want to give the impression that these discussions are constrained by what's actually in the language of the executive order.
Jake?
Yeah, just to touch on that, certainly we consider executive orders when setting our rulemaking priorities, but they are not binding to, force us to publish them directly. In fact, we are actually prohibited from doing so. The APA forces us to use reason while doing this. So while we certainly took the executive order into account, there are, as Jeff said, other priorities that go into this, as well as, reasoned judgment within the agency as to how these comport with the rest of our regulations. So we brought all of that in when drafting this. So it's more expansive for that reason.
Thank you, Jake. Michael, you have the floor.
Magnus, I'll just mention a few things. It's a spectrum, but I think generally the practice is to encourage the involvement of students. I can't think and have no knowledge of any agency that prohibits it for sure. It's some examples include either surveying, meeting with students, requiring student involvement in the evaluation process either at the program or institutional level. Some institutions may include them in their self-study process, and some institutions have a committee of students that participate in the self-study process, which is always an effective tool and resource. Sometimes it's student government leaders that will meet with an onset evaluation team. All of those are mechanisms that exist currently without anything in regulation. So generally I would say there is student involvement to the extent that you would want to put forward any additional language under D. We would certainly be open to what that might look like as well.
Thank you, Michael. Beth, please.
I just to point out in the part in the reg that would be applicable would be in section 60223. And that is operating procedures all accrediting agencies must have, and that would be B, and that in providing public notice that an institution or program subject to its jurisdiction is being considered for accreditation or pre-accreditation, the agency must provide an opportunity for third-party comment concerning the institution or program's qualifications for accreditation or pre-accreditation at the agency's discretion. Third-party comment may be received either in writing or at a public hearing or both. So it doesn't specifically say students, but there is a requirement for third-party comment during the evaluation process.
Thank you, Beth. Michael, did you have a brief follow-up before I go back to Magnus?
I was just going to say where I thought that I was hearing you talk about was more along D in this section where it says conducts at least one on-site review of the institution or program during which it obtains sufficient information. And if you thought you want to float the idea of including student feedback or something along those lines, we would be open to seeing that.
Thank you, Michael. Jeff?
Yeah, and I would say the department would not be opposed to that either.
Thank you, Jeff. Magnus, you have the floor.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much. I saw you spoke with Heather. I appreciate you bringing some of those examples. And like I said, I know it is sometimes difficult to get students to engage with deep processes like the one that we are engaging in now. So I appreciate the department being open to that. Beth, I appreciate you bringing that to light. And now that you have mentioned that, I would probably work with Ryan to propose changes to both sections because third-party comment, students don't always view themselves that way because they're in the institution, they're part of the institutional community. So I would say students and the institute, just to make it explicit that students can reference the regulation and say, oh, we do have a chance. And then to Michael's point, encouraging or to whatever extent the regulation is able to encourage that behavior from the accreditors with regard to, there are standing policies at individual accreditors right now.
Thank you, Magnus. Michael?
Yeah, and I would just add that student engagement in that process can lead to a very fulfilling and long career in accreditation. So for all those students, recent graduates in May, if you're looking for a gig, there's a wonderful opportunity that might present itself.
Thank you, Michael. Mike Shires, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just, I want to thank the group that worked so hard on realigning 16 and 17. I will say organizations representing the public interest and taxpayers were not part of those conversations. And so a lot of these conversations and a lot of the languages around civil rights are completely new to me at this point. So I look forward to working with the department and the folks who were involved in those conversations to get a deeper understanding of the approaches that were talked about and discussed as we advance the work to the next level.
Thank you, Mike. Brian, you have the floor.
I just want to make sure that we're not moving on. Are we moving on from where Magnus was at?
I would love for someone to move us on. Yes.
Can I just go to on page 14, Romanet I there? In that first sentence there, it says that reduces unnecessary barriers that limit allows institutions or programs. Is that a typo?
Yeah, that is a typo. That's because that's a result of the stem changing when we moved it from the other section, I believe. The limit and allow, the two directly conflicting words. I believe that this was a combination of the stem moving and then yeah, and your revisions, because you I specifically recall Mike saying that you made this more positive. And yeah, so I think we accidentally undeleted the limit or something. We'll take a look at it though.
Thank you for pointing that out, Brian. Anything additional? Okay, Jennifer, you have the floor.
I mean, I might be bringing it home because I'm moving to 16, 17. So if anybody has anything before. So, I mean, it's short because I'm not going to reiterate everything. But there's again, and I don't remember where it starts, but somewhere on, so this section is, some of the things are fine. Some of the lists are fine, but they're all shows up again. And to my point about multiple mentions. So the First Amendment ends up, I guess it's top of 17 and L. Is it 1 or L? I guess, is that an L? That's an L, right? Right. Agencies accreditation standards, policies, and the obligations on the First Amendment. This one's slightly different, but my point is that there is a body in the regulations where that is on operational procedures and doesn't relate to like the standards. And I think a lot of this can be there and not here because you're talking about how the accreditor, in this case, I think you're talking about how the accreditor is behaving and not about like how they're reviewing the schools. And so there is it's a weird nuance, but there is a whole section that I think it's 23. I'm like not looking at my regs right now on operational procedures. Yeah. So Beth's nodding her head yes. So I think if we're going to, well, I'm hoping that we're going to move some of the First Amendment and then M and N, which are the sort of contraventions of other laws. And there's also places that I think that is 28 that says sort of deference to state laws or something like that. And so I feel like some of this, and I think Michael asked this question yesterday about whether, it may have been in caucus, I don't remember, but whether 60228 could be expanded beyond its limitations to include some of these concepts. And so I'm just putting back again, because one of the things that we were really trying to get after in our proposal was the bringing it all back to what the section on applicability of the standards is. And these items, it's not necessarily to delete them, it's to sort of put them where they belong, in my view, in existing regulations. And so I'm just really hopeful that we can, and I'm happy again, this is, I mean, if I'm happy to take another whack at your version to get there. But this time, Michael and I, instead of putting comments, like, I'm happy to tell you what are, yeah, where at least my head is and where his head is on where to move everything.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mike, you have the floor.
I do. Just a very minor point that was raised in the first time we went through these, but since it's still here, I'll raise it again. On the bottom of page 16, and I don't know if that's item 1, a misnumbered item 1 or 5, it should be 5, or if it's an L and the next one should be M. But the last paragraph, the agency trains staff annually and trains, it says peer reviewers. I would propose that should say either evaluation teams or site visitors on the various education models.
Thank you, Mike. Monty, you have the floor.
If we are reaching the end of our review of 16 and 17, then I'd like to just mention a piece that was not captured in 17, just for the record. There was a proposal submitted dealing with credit for prior learning that had come from a number of different constituencies. We are looking for a place to apply that language. And so I talked with Jeff at the break just to make sure that everyone is aware that that proposal is still out there, but we did not want to muddy the water. As we get through 16 and 17, we'll find a place to be able to place that. Fair enough?
Yeah, and for the record, we've received the proposal. We've looked at it. We're also trying to figure out exactly where we want to put it here in a way that isn't confusing and works for everybody.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Monty. AD, you have the floor.
If maybe Jake can maybe clarify this language at the end of 17. Agency may not have standards that encourage direct or otherwise require institutions or programs to violate federal or state law, including by having policies that provide any preference on the basis of race. So yesterday we talked about on page 85 about, in that instance about any based on their race, color, national origin, or sex. We talked about lawful and unlawful. Is there, by having this paragraph here, is there any change from what it said on page 85?
Jake?
And I have a follow-up to that. Just want to.
I want to double check to make sure we're talking about the same paragraph, or the paragraph that was moved, rather. But I don't believe we changed any requirements here.
Okay. And on a follow-up, that in this sentence that any policies provide any preference on the basis of race. I am not an attorney, but when we were discussing that page 85, I did get somebody who did send something that that there are limited cases where institutions can take race into account in limited circumstances, part of remedying specific past discrimination, including as part of a court order plan to resolve a prior case. Is that sentence a problem with that? And then I have legal citations by saying that the way it says it here is it's pretty absolute, that it's cannot have any policies provide any preference on the basis of race. Is there a legal exception to that? Jeff, please.
So is your suggestion to modify that to talk about unlawful preferences?
That might answer it. Again, I started with a question. If that is true, then we would need to modify it. If I misunderstood that, then it may not need it.
Thank you. We'll take a look at it.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it. I mean, in terms of exceptions to discrimination on race, there are certain provisions that do allow for that, not so much in ed. I would note that the Students for Fair Admissions case is kind of important there in terms of flattening out, any rules regarding preferential treatment based on race. Also, I would note that Title IX is still applicable for any program that participates in Title IV, which does prohibit any discrimination based on race, and that's irrespective of the mission or organization of organizational documents of the institution itself.
Thank you, AD. Thank you, Jake. Michael, you have the floor.
I might be misremembering, but I think that there is a reference maybe somewhere in 668 about prior learning experience that requires accreditors either to have a policy or to publish. There's something somewhere. It's right in the same place about placement rates, or it's like under disclosures in 668 that you might want to look at. If I'm if I'm remembering. So that you might be able to do a cross-reference there of some sort. And then lastly, I'm not sure if you made some changes on page 15 to K1. I've mentioned this a couple times before. I'm gonna kind of keep talking on this one, but at a minimum, K1 should be does not knowingly or intentionally make any false, misleading, or materially incomplete statements. I think would be a fair if we can't move that down, because again, my concern here is that we're already requiring accreditors to be transparent, to put their findings out there. There's oftentimes disagreement between the accreditor and the institution as to whether or not there's a compliance issue or whether or not the agency is wrong in its application of its standards. And as those progress from review and evaluation to warning to show cause to probation to revocation, they become increasingly more complex. And so I don't know if, I think you've changed and modified the language a bit. It looks like it, but I'd have to go back and compare the two. But at a minimum, kind of the mens rea measurement of intention might be something that could be useful there.
Thank you, Michael. Mark, you have the floor.
So I want to go back to where AD was on M and suggest that we consider the following. And the AD's point is here, trace other places, it's other combinations, is that perhaps this could be made as simple as that the agency may not have standards that encourage, direct, or otherwise require institutions or programs to violate federal or state law. So that's all as it is. And then rather than going through this, just say that permit or promote unlawful discrimination.
We can consider that, but I think that might be narrower than what we were intending here. But
Actually, I'm intending to go broader than what you're intending.
Okay.
So there can be unlawful discrimination based on race, but there also could be unlawful discrimination against people with disabilities. There can be unlawful discrimination against people with other characteristics. So what I'm saying is that the institution can have policies that either permit or promote unlawful discrimination, period.
I got you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. We are through the comments and questions at this time, Department, and we're less than 10 minutes from the lunch hour. There is one more card. I apologize. I missed it. Jennifer, please.
I just wanted to, on Mark's edit, I would support that if it weren't in this section. And which, by the way, also makes it broader because it would be more applicable to the entire regulation and to procedures and not just in this section. So, so along the lines of what I just said.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. Department, what would you like to cover in advance of the lunch hour?
Since everybody got through this, we would be willing to offer the time to the committee for longer lunch.
Accepted. We will return at 1 p.m. Enjoy your lunch.